Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am Mickey from Mickey the Bookworm, and I know it's been a really long time since I have uploaded. There's just been a lot of life going on, trying to squeeze in the last bits of summer because summer in Maine ends pretty quickly. It's already starting to cool off a little bit, and also just dealing with like some mental health things, and I also helped my mom move my sister into college out in Iowa, so that was a big undertaking. I meant to vlog Mood Readathon, that didn't end up happening. I thought about vlogging the trip to Iowa, but that was just too much, and I didn't want to make my mom and sister feel uncomfortable by doing that. So yeah, I'm back now, and I decided it was time to do a wrap-up video because I haven't done one in a really long time. So for June, July, and August, I'm pretty sure I haven't done a wrap-up video for any of the summer months, and so I have a massive ton of books that I've read. In fact, I have a list in the order that I read them for all 3 months, and it's actually 3 pages long. So I'm gonna keep this with me to refer to because I'm gonna forget something, and some of them were either like library books that I had to return or ebooks that I don't have a physical copy of sitting right here. So I'm just gonna go through them in the order that I read them, starting with the month of June. So in June, I started off my month with a graphic novel, Quiet Girl in a Noisy World by Debbie Tongue. This book is absolutely adorable, and if you are an introverted bookworm sort of person like I am, this book will be right up your alley. It is so cute, and I think if you have non-introverted members of your family or like a significant other or something that don't always feel like they really get you, honestly, I'd have them read this because it really gives a pretty good look into what life feels like for an introvert. The second book that I read in June was The Astronaut Wives Club by Lily Koval, and I picked it up because I had found it in a used bookstore and it just looked interesting, and then I decided that it was time to get in and read it when I saw in the news that Annie Glenn had actually passed away. If you don't know, she was the wife of John Glenn, who I think was the first American in space. I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, it was just a really awesome look into the women that were married to the astronauts, and in the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, they were like all over the news, all over the magazines, kind of used like influencers would be now. But when we learn about like the space race and all of the NASA missions in school, like we never hear anything about the astronauts' families, and I just thought it was really eye-opening to see like the expectations that NASA actually had for the wives and for the families, and just like their way of life and how things happen for them, and then like the massive amounts of control that NASA had over the men and their time and the amount of time that they spent away from their families, and how that ultimately made a lot of the marriages deteriorate. So it was good. It was, parts of it were very sad and really eye-opening and just super interesting and chock full of history about the space race. Number 3 for June was China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan. I don't want to go too deep into this because it's the second book after Crazy Rich Asians, and I don't want to give a lot of spoilers. But if you know a little bit about Crazy Rich Asians, this is the next book. There's more drama, there's more stuff going on, and it's just another really fun read. I think it's a really good continuation of the series, and I can't wait to get into book 3. The next book that I read in June was Rilla of Ingleside by L.M. Montgomery, and this is number 8 in the Anne of Green Gables series. I actually picked this up as a reread because I was participating in a readathon that ultimately never really happened. But I went ahead and reread this book anyway because it's been one of my favorites, and it's one of my favorites within the Anne of Green Gables series. This is about Anne's daughter and growing up as a teen during World War I, and she's got a sweetheart and brothers that are off in the war, and she kind of goes from, like, the night that war is declared, she kind of goes from this, like, sweet, airheaded, kind of sheltered, maybe even a little bit pampered young teenage girl to kind of having to grow up overnight and start thinking about how her life and her choices and her actions impact other people, and how she can be of help from the home front. So I've just always really loved this story. It's very sweet. It's a beautiful way, I think, to end the Anne of Green Gables series. It's always been one of my favorites, and I still love it. The 5th book that I read in June was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I know I've talked a lot about this on my channel, but I've been rereading the original Hunger Games trilogy in anticipation of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and so this is book 1. I picked it back up. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm going to do another video that will kind of give some insight a little bit more into, like, my thought processes going through the trilogy again, and then how the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes actually fits into the trilogy. I guess that's not really the right way to say it because it's a prequel, but how well the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes fits as a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. So I'll just say I reread this. I really, really loved it. Definitely as much as I did the first time, and it was nice to see it hold up as one of my favorite books as a teenager. It was nice to see it hold up in my 20s now, and still have it be one of my favorites. The next book I read in June was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This was just amazingly good. I really enjoyed it. It explores the issue of colorism and light privilege, which is when people of color who have lighter skin tones that are closer to white can pass as white or are given more opportunities because their skin tone makes them appear closer to white. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the contrast between the twin sisters and their lives, and then their children their lives end up intersecting. There's a lot in here about exploration of identity and what family looks like, and it's just a lot in here, but in a really good story, and the characters feel like people that I would want to be friends with, and so it makes me that much more invested in the story. I really enjoyed this. I am looking forward to reading any other of Britt Bennett's books. I know she had at least one out before this, so I have that book, The Mothers, on my TBR as well, but I really enjoyed The Vanishing Half. Alright, the next book that I read in June was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I read this in preparation for Three Blondes in a Book club, which I have been a part of since it started in January, and this is about a girl who is kind of maybe a little bit on the outskirts of the social circles in her school, and she's kind of like the straight A, perfect student, and she has this favorite podcast that she feels like is a very like nerdy, how do I want to say it? Like a nerdy outlet for her inner nerd that she kind of tries to hide. And she ends up finding out who the creator of her favorite podcast is, befriending the creator, helping create episodes, and then she accidentally outs who the creator is when the creator wanted to stay anonymous. And there's, again, a lot of exploration in here about identity, about the expectations that are put on teenagers in school by their parents, by their teachers, by society, and it was a really interesting read. I definitely enjoyed it. A little bit of it was, I almost want to say whimsical, especially in the bits where they were talking about the podcast, and I really enjoyed. Okay. Number 7 for the month of June was Space Boy by Stephen McCraney, and this is another graphic novel, and this is about a girl named Amy who has kind of grown up in space, and then in her teens her parents have to move back to Earth, and so she has to go back to Earth. She has to try to fit in on Earth, to go to a new school, meet new people, and because of the time difference between the planet that she grew up on and Earth, her best friend basically grows up without her back in space. And so she's still a teenager, and now her best friend is a grown-up by the time she gets to Earth, and then she has to kind of learn to re-navigate the world. And she meets a boy who has no smell, and this is significant because Amy associates a different smell with every person she meets. It says on the back cover, her mom is the flavor of mint, sharp and bright. Her dad is like hot chocolate, sweet and full of gentle warmth. So she associates like flavors with each person that she meets and comes across, and she meets a boy with no flavor. And this was the first book in the series, and so it didn't really get too much into why he has no flavor. We didn't see that much of him. We didn't really unpack that, but it's still a really cute story, and it made me really want to get into the second installment of Space Boy. Alright, then the last book that I read in June was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and this took on so many issues. This unpacks so many societal issues, I don't even know where to start. But basically, Shaker Heights is a Cleveland suburb. Everything is planned out, and this artist moves into Shaker Heights with her daughter. And they're kind of transient. They go wherever the wind takes them based on Mia's career and where she feels like inspiration is going to come from next. They keep very short leases, and they end up leasing an apartment from a family who are basically Shaker Heights natives, and they like everything to be perfect and planned out. And the more they get like to know each other and to be part of each other's lives, the more things implode. It's just crazy and a really interesting read, and it's a little bit long, but I flew through it because it was just so interesting. I don't want to say too much because I feel like I'll give spoilers, but definitely a very interesting read. So, for the month of July, we had several ebooks and library books in here, so my pile of books that I physically have with me is shorter, but I will put the covers up on the screen. The first book that I read in July was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, and it's just such a fun read, wonderful story about a girl who is a teen mom and she wants to learn to be a chef, and she has to figure out how to balance learning how to be a chef taking a culinary arts class and taking care of her aging grandma, and her mom has passed away. Her dad isn't really regularly a part of her life, so she's kind of on her own with all of this. She has her baby girl's dad that she's no longer in a relationship with, but she still has to navigate a relationship with him because of their daughter, and a love interest as well. And so trying to learn to balance all of those things and all the ways that she tries to all of the ways that she tries to work it out, and the ways that her friends and family and loved ones come together to help her, and the community that they have. And it's just a really, really good read. I definitely encourage people to read it. I love how there's little recipes included, and I really enjoyed it. It was a short read. The chapters are really small, so it's easy to breeze through. So if you're looking for something that, I wouldn't call it light because the issues are heavy, but it was definitely still fun and it was fast, I would definitely recommend With the Fire on High. The second book that I read in June was Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and this is Chanel's memoir, and it was tough to read. Definitely comes with trigger warnings because Chanel Miller is more commonly known, unfortunately, as the girl who Brock Turner assaulted. And it is a really eye-opening look at the American justice system, all of the brokenness that's there, how she was made to feel like the criminal even though she was the victim, and everything that she went through with the media, with her family, with the legal system, all the things that people assumed that she would know, that how would she know, and trying to kind of rebuild her life with all of it going on and after it happened. Definitely a heavy read, but a really necessary look at all of the change that is needed in the way that rape and sexual assault and sexual harassment are dealt with in the American justice system. The next book that I read in July was Self-Care by Leigh Stein, and I gotta say, I almost DNF'd it. This book was just vapid. I absolutely hated it. I know that it was written to come across as satire, but there was like nothing witty or amusing about it. There was nothing clever about it. It was just a satire about boss babe culture. And honestly, if it hadn't been so over the top and ridiculous, I probably wouldn't have even realized that it was satire. The characters were ridiculously unlikable. The plot was iffy in terms of reality at best. And it was just, I hated it. I hated it. I picked it up because the author wrote a very insightful article that I enjoyed, and it was mentioned at the end of the post that her book was being released, so I bought the ebook, and I wish I had. Sorry. I couldn't get into it. Okay. The next book that I read in July was The End of Your Life Book Club by Will Schwalb. I don't really know how to say that. End of Your Life Book Club is a memoir where the author is writing about the time that he spent with his mother as she was being treated for and eventually succumbing to pancreatic cancer. And one thing that the two of them always had in common was a love for reading, and so they would exchange books back and forth and read them, and then at each of her doctor's appointments they would end up discussing the books. It was a little bit slow, but I thought it was really sweet, and the mom, Mary Ann, reminded me a lot of my own grandma who passed away from ovarian cancer in 2016, except Mary Ann was definitely more liberal politically, but other than that, I really found like similar personality traits, and it reminded me of the journey with my grandma, and I just thought it was really sweet, even if it was a little bit of a slower read. The fifth book that I read in July was The Institute by Stephen King. This book is thick. It is a time commitment, but it's so enjoyable. I flew right through it. The chapters are also shorter, so that helps. It is about a boy who is kidnapped and his parents are killed, and he's taken to a place in the wilderness of Maine, and basically they experiment on children there, and it's kind of an interesting mix between thriller and fantasy. I don't want to give away too much because of the nature of the whole thriller genre, but it's about the kids trying to figure out exactly what's happening to them, because obviously the people running the institute don't really tell them anything. And there's also another storyline that intersects with the institute as well, with a retired cop, and it's just very, very interesting all around. I got into it really easily, and I read the whole thing in about 3 days, even though it's close to 600 pages long. The sixth book that I read in July was What You Wish For by Catherine Center, and this, unfortunately, I pre-ordered this. I discovered Catherine Center through How to Walk Away and Things You Save in a Fire. Really liked both of those. A little bit corny romance, but still nice. This book, though, was like every cliche in the book done badly, incredibly frustrating. The characters were ridiculously childish. It took a heavy issue and tried to insert it into a romance novel. It didn't work. It made things too easy, like the resolution I felt like was too easy. It was so sweet, it was sticky and completely unbelievable, and I don't think I've ever been disappointed more in a book that I anticipated. I just could not with this book. So yeah, well, that was disappointing. Alright, the seventh book that I read in July was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This, again, was part of my project to read through the Hunger Games trilogy and do that in anticipation of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I know this book gets a lot of hate as the second book, but I love it. I still found it really enjoyable. It also held up, and I'm really glad I reread it. Alright, number 8, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. So this book was another read for the Three Blondes in a Book club, and this is beautiful. I adored this book. This is about a guy named Linus who works in a really dead-end job. It's a very unhappy, very controlling place, and he's not happy there at all. But part of his job is to go inspect these orphanages where magical children are kept, and they're basically there to be controlled and make sure that they're not a danger to the public. And he goes to this one top secret orphanage where some of the most threatening children are being housed, and he goes to inspect it and see if the caretaker there is actually competent. And I loved this book. It's an adult fantasy, but it's written a lot like a middle grade, and you have all that whimsy. And so if you enjoy going back into like childhood favorites and middle grade YA fantasy, but you want a little bit more adult content, The House in the Cerulean Sea would definitely be something for you. I just could not get over the writing style. It was so... I keep overusing the word whimsical, but that's just the best way to describe it. Whimsical, sweet, I was invested in the storyline. I fell in love with the characters, especially the children in the orphanage, and definitely would highly recommend this book. It explores found family, and it takes on the heavy issue of prejudice, and especially unconscious prejudice and biases, and it's just a really sweet read that I definitely highly recommend. Okay, number 9 for July was Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. Not going to say too much about it again, but I will say Mockingjay has always been my least favorite of the trilogy because honestly, I am actually not a fan of how the Hunger Games trilogy ended, which I'll unpack more in my later video, but I found going into it that I loved all the same things about this book that I loved the first time I read it, and the same things that made me want to throw the book across the room when I was, 19, made me want to throw the book across the room at 25. And a lot of life has happened for me in between 19 and 25, so I feel like if a book can do that, it's probably pretty good. And the last book that I finished in July was Summer of '69 by Ellen Hildebrand. And this was a really kind of fun, kind of like a beach read, but actually with like better writing. This is about a young girl who's sent to Nantucket to spend the summer with her grandmother. Her siblings are grown. She has a brother in Vietnam. One of her sisters is pregnant and married, and so she's not coming to Nantucket. And her other sister is kind of off being a hippie and trying to do her own thing. And so she has to learn how to navigate the summer alone. We also get multiple viewpoints, so we hear from the other sisters as well in this book, and it mentions some big events from the summer of '69, like the Ted Kennedy incident at Chappaquiddick and the moon launch, and all of that's going on in this book. It's a really nice coming of age story. It's a good kind of family drama, and well, if they made a movie of this, I'd totally watch it. It started off slow, but I ended up enjoying it, and it wasn't a bad read. Okay. Last up, I have the books that I read in August, and we're gonna start off with Hidden Valley Road by, oh geez, can I remember the author's name? I can't remember the author's name. I'll put it up here. Anyway, Hidden Valley Road is a biography of a family that there were 10 children, and out of those 10, there were 8 boys and 2 girls. The 2 girls were the youngest children, and I think 4 or 5 of the brothers ended up being diagnosed schizophrenic. But it's also written very academic, and it kind of goes with a family history like year by year, so it's ridiculously long. And again, it's written academically. There's a lot of repetitive information in there, so it really just didn't need to be as long as it was, and it wasn't as interesting as I hoped it would be. It felt like an academic was trying to write for normal people. I was expecting a normal person book, so even though I like to read academic writing sometimes, I wasn't prepared for this book. It also definitely needs to come with trigger warnings for sexual abuse and domestic violence as well. But overall, it wasn't a bad read, wasn't my favorite, but I didn't regret picking it up. The next book that I read in August was One to Watch by Kate Stamen London, and about a plus-size fashion blogger who basically shoots to fame overnight when she writes a post criticizing Main Squeeze, which is a thinly veiled version of The Bachelor, for never having diverse or plus size women on the show. Of the show ends up meeting with her and asking her to come on for the next season as the main squeeze. And so basically she's the bachelorette and they find a group of men, and it's interesting everything that she goes through. This is a mixed media book. I've seen some people who haven't liked that. I really like the concept because let's be real, most of us are trash for The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. We know it's awful, we know it's not diverse, and we know that there's tons of problems with it, and we all still watch it anyway. So I thought this would be a fun romance novel exploring basically The Bachelorette. And I didn't love it. I'm just gonna put that out there. And I haven't given it a rating on Goodreads, and I haven't written a review because I'm not a plus size person, and so I don't feel like I'm necessarily the one to do that. But there are multiple plus size bloggers and YouTubers who have criticized this book, and suffice it to say, I agree with them. There were some very problematic issues in here with stereotyping, whether it was because of someone's size or because of someone's skin color, and it was not everything that we wanted it to be. We loved the concept, but the execution left much to be desired. And so I honestly, I can't recommend this book. I wanted to, and I can't. I understand that there's not enough plus size rep in the literary market. I would love to see that change, but again, I looked for the reviews from other plus size bloggers. Some of them really do like this. I don't want to criticize them. That's their opinion, that's up to them, but others have just said this isn't helpful, it's still harmful, and we need to do better. And I just happen to agree with them. There's also some skinny shaming that goes on, and I won't get into that, but well actually yeah, I'm gonna just a little bit. If you have to tear other women down for their body type to make you feel better about your body type, honey, you still got a long way to go. So let's just all not talk about each other's body types in a criticizing way at all, ever. Okay? Like, let's just all be nice to each other. Cool. Alright, the next book that I read in August was Keep It Shut by Karen Amen. This is a book written from a Christian perspective about keeping your mouth shut, obviously, but just kind of a short, here's some reasons you shouldn't be opening your big fat trap and some ways to keep from doing it. And it wasn't a bad read, and as someone who tends to have a big mouth, it was good for me to read it, but I feel like I wasn't the target market for this book because I just felt like it was written for a middle-aged woman. Like, I feel like this was written for Karens who are trying to reform by a Karen who is trying to reform. Her name is literally Karen. It was meh. That's all I gotta say. The next book that I read in August was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This was a book I picked for the cover because it's beautiful and it reminds me of Maine, even though the book is set in British Columbia. So this is about a woman who meets a rich man in a hotel bar where she is bartending, and they end up married. and she lives this wealthy life, and then it turns out he's part of a Ponzi scheme and they lose all that. And basically everything in this story keeps coming back to this hotel in Cayette where they met and where she used to work and where her brother used to work. And we just keep coming back there. Like, all roads lead back to that hotel. There's a lot of details that seem like small and insignificant and then resurface later in the story and kind of tie some things together. And I just thought that was really well done. I really enjoyed this book. It didn't end the way I wanted it to end, but it also, you know, it was unexpected. And so that wasn't a bad thing either. So I ended up giving this book, I think, 4 stars, and I definitely enjoyed it. The next book that I read in August was The Light We Lost by Jill Santopolo, and I hated it. It was awful. Basically the premise is 2 college seniors end up meeting each other on 9/11, and they're in New York. They can see everything that's happening from their dorms, and they just met in a class, and then the planes hit the towers. They go back to his dorm room, they watch the whole thing, and then they end up separating, and then their lives keep intersecting. Eventually they're in a relationship again, and then they're not, and then there's all this stuff. And I thought both of the main characters in this, Lucy and Gabe, I think they're both selfish and childish, and at some point, if you make the decision to move on in your life, then you need to like go ahead and move on for real. And it's just kind of like, it's written from Lucy's perspective. I thought she was kind of whiny. I thought she was entitled. I thought she was selfish. I thought Gabe was entitled and selfish. And there's justified cheating in this, and I just don't think that cheating is something that's justifiable. And I hated the ending. It was cliche. It was predictable. And honestly, it was too convenient. I hated this book. I don't recommend it. The next book I read in July was Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald by Therese Ann Fowler. Now, Zelda Fitzgerald was the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is the writer of things like Tender as the Night, The Great Gatsby, some of these things that we know as classics. She was basically his muse. She was the archetype for the flapper, and she actually did a lot of the writing. And this book explores some of that, of her as a woman, of her as a writer, and it does not paint a very flattering portrait of F. Scott Fitzgerald, because frankly it would be impossible to paint a flattering portrait of F. Scott Fitzgerald because he was awful. But this is Zelda's perspective on her life. It's slightly fictionalized, but it's taken from her letters and her diaries and other documents that have been preserved, and it's definitely an enjoyable read. If you're familiar with the story of Zelda Fitzgerald, it's not really new information, but I still found it enjoyable. And if you're not familiar with the story of Zelda Fitzgerald, this is a good starting place. The next book I read in August was Beartown by Frederick Bachman, and this book definitely needs to come with trigger warnings for sexual assault, rape, and everything that goes along with that. But again, the injustices in the legal system, and the prejudices of people in the town, and it is heavy, but it makes you think, and I am definitely looking forward to picking up Us Against You, which is the sequel to this one. I definitely recommend this if it's something that's not going to trigger you in a harmful way, just because it's so thoughtful and I did enjoy it. It was heavy, but I enjoyed it. Next was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. I listened to a great deal of this on audiobook because it's so long, but this is the story of a girl named Lenny, and her family ends up moving to Alaska in the 70s, where Alaska is still very much a frontier. Her dad is a Vietnam vet with a lot of issues stemming from PTSD, and he is abusive to her mom, so definitely trigger warnings for domestic violence all over this book. It's throughout, but it's basically written like a love letter to Alaska, and it ends up being a romance too, in a very sweet way, and I really enjoyed it. Definitely recommend this one as well if you're into adventure and suspense. I can definitely say there's a lot of suspense involved in this as well. So again, if it's not going to trigger you in a harmful way, The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna is an awesome read. The next book I read was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This was kind of to go along with reading Z. I love this book. It's been one of my favorites ever since I was forced to read it in high school. To be honest, I'm not sure I would have gotten the full depth of this book if I hadn't been made to actually study it in high school, but knowing everything that I now know about it from that study, it's been one of my favorites ever since. And obviously I have a really beautiful copy that I got on purpose just because I love it so much, and it's going to be on my bookshelf forever. All right, next we have I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. This book is not a particularly easy read. Again, it is part of my anti-racism reading that I am doing to educate myself, so I haven't given it a star rating and I haven't reviewed it because I don't feel like that's my place. But I will say it's written from the perspective of a Christian woman, and if you are a white evangelical Christian like I am, this is a good place to start your anti-racism reading. It's a little bit gentler in tone from some other books that I've read. So I just say that because it makes it a little bit easier to educate yourself, but you're going to feel upset and defensive about some of it, probably, if, again, you are a white evangelical Christian like I am. And I say, press through those feelings and listen to what she has to say, because this is her memoir. She is writing about her personal experiences. And again, I think having it written in memoir form is, at least for me, I think that's a little bit easier to read, like makes her points easier to not get so defensive about because she's writing about her life. And I am honestly so grateful to her for taking the time to write this book, for taking the time to write something so eye-opening, for delving into her pain and sharing that with us, because it is so helpful and it is needed for those of us that are still trying to educate ourselves. And I'm just so glad that she was willing to write this. Definitely recommend this as a read. That's all I'm really going to say about it, because again, I am not the best voice to be reviewing this book. I can only recommend it as someone who fits into a particular category to other people who are like me. Next up, we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, and I am about 2/3 of the way into this. I haven't finished it yet, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but I felt like getting 2/3 of the way through it was significant considering how thick it is. I feel like this book has gotten really like mixed or not great reviews, and I feel bad about that because I've been really enjoying it. But I also was really heavily into this prior to my trip to Iowa and then found it harder to get back into it after I got back. So we'll see what happens when I finish it, and I will let you guys know when I do my video about The Hunger Games. That's it for my summer wrap up. Lots of videos. I'm also not going to be posting a September TBR because I don't have one. I am going to be straight up mood reading for September. The only book I know for sure is going to be on there is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, because that is coming out this month and I was able to choose it as my book of the month, and so that is on its way to me, and that's the only book I know for sure I'm reading in September. So other than that, we'll just see what happens. But thanks for watching, and I hope you guys will tune in again soon.